Terry Francona made the announcement your Cincinnati Reds opening day starter should be no surprise because he 1000% deserves it.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Reds. Welcome in. My name is Jeff Carr. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I am a lifelong Cincinnati Reds fan, and I've been hosting this show, whether solo or co-hosted, now going on to my 7th season. I'm so glad that you're making Locked On Reds part of your day. Locked On Reds is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every single day. Thanks for always making us your first listen. And on today's show, we are 20 days away from opening day, which means I get to tell you why Frank Robinson was robbed of being the greatest Red ever. That's a little later in today's show. I also want to tell you who I see winning the position battles for the final rotation spot, final bullpen spot, and the final bench spot in just a few minutes. But we are going to begin with the Reds' recently announced opening day starter on today's episode that is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. And where we will get started with today is breaking news. The Cincinnati Reds and Terry Francona, the manager, have announced that Hunter Greene will be the opening day starter for your Cincinnati Reds here in 2025. Should come as no surprise that Hunter Greene was announced that way. He is clearly the ace of this Reds pitching staff, but he is also one of the top reasons to believe in the Reds' playoff hopes in 2025. Hunter Greene is so stinking good. And quite frankly, last season, I made a bold prediction that one Reds player would have 6 wins above replacement or more. They'd be a 6-WAR player. According to Baseball Reference, that was Hunter Greene. Hunter Greene was so good in 2024. Almost slipped there, forgot what year it was. In 2024. And it was a bummer that he dealt with the injuries that he had there at the end of the season that cut his season just short enough that he wasn't going to be a bigger factor in the Cy Young vote. You know, it was always going to be Chris Sale. I kind of felt like Hunter Greene had an uphill battle against Chris Sale, but Hunter Greene had a very legitimate case to be number 2 in Cy Young voting had he not missed that little bit of time there at the end of the season. But I found it intriguing because on Wednesday's radio broadcast, Jim Day was doing the play-by-play with Jeff Brantley on WLW. And Jim Day was talking on that broadcast about the fact that he got to talk with Hunter Greene for a recent episode of the Jim Day podcast. And Hunter Greene stopped short because he was really getting into the nitty-gritty of his pitching philosophy, of his strategy heading into 2025. And Hunter Greene stopped short because he about said, I'm going to throw this many splitters or whatever, this many sliders, this many fastballs. He was really going to get into those down and dirty details. But it was clear that Hunter Greene is going to throw the splitter a lot more this year. That was really a development last year. He kind of threw it in 2023, but it was like few and far between, not enough that you could really evaluate it. He definitely ramped it up a slight bit more in 2024. He only threw it 8% of the time, but that 8% was really effective. In fact, there were a lot of different reasons as to why Hunter Greene was so much better in 2024 than he had been in years past. His fastball was so much better. It was very efficient. His slider, he did a very good job of getting swings and miss on and really put guys away with the slider. But it was the addition of the splitter and really kind of ramping up its usage that I think if he continues to do that, it's going to vault him to the top of the Cy Young voting this year. Like I mentioned, threw it 8% of the time last year, but it was super effective. The Baseball Savant, a website that I love to use when it comes to evaluating players and really getting the peripheral view of their numbers. It's not necessarily the numbers that explain the big picture, but it helps fill in the gaps. And some of the numbers that filled in the gaps on his splitter said that the expected batting average against the splitter should have been like 189. It was slightly above 200. I think it was like 220, something like that. He allowed on the splitter, but it was 189. Expected slugging of 219. So guys were not making good contact on this thing at all. He kind of got BABIP'd a little bit with it, and that's why you saw some of the numbers. You had 220 batting average against the slugging against the splitter was like 400 something, but the expected number said that he was throwing it a lot better. He just got unlucky. And he used it mostly against lefties because the way that his split finger pitch breaks is it breaks breaks away from the left-handed side of the plate. So he's got the slider that breaks in to lefties, and he's got the splitter that breaks away, and he's got the fastball that kind of rises and maybe even breaks a little bit away, at least according to the profile on Baseball Savant. But essentially, he's got three pitches that do three different things now with the split finger. And that's why the addition of that is so key. But all of that got put together into this package that was it was so awesome last year for Hunter Greene and the performances that he had. But one of the big reasons why he was so good is that he actually was good at home. What do we always say about Great American Ballpark? It sucks to be a pitcher at Great American Ballpark, right? Like that doesn't just extend to opposing pitchers. That's Reds pitchers as well. Most Reds pitchers have dramatic home and away splits. And while his was there was a slight gap, at least as far as ERA is concerned, he was actually better at home when it came to strikeout to walk ratio. One of our favorite things to use here on the Locked On Reds podcast, everydayers will know, we love talking about strikeout to walk ratio when it comes to evaluating pitchers. He had 3.3 strikeouts per walk at home. So he was really efficient with it. But even his ERA wasn't horrible at home. It's 3.38. You'll take that every day of the week. A 3.38 ERA in 80 innings pitched at Great American Ballpark is elite. And Hunter Greene is elite. He was still better on the road. His ERA on the road was 2.05 in 70 innings pitched on the road. But I think that this is going to be just the beginning. Terry Francona announcing that Hunter Greene is going to be the opening day starter for the Reds. It's just going to be the beginning of what's going to be just another great season for Hunter Greene. I firmly believe that he's got the talent to win a Cy Young, even pitching most of his games at Great American Ballpark. I think that just speaks to how good of a pitcher that he is. But I'm looking more for, closer to 200 innings this year. Like you said, you only pitched 150 last year. I think we see somewhere around 180 innings for him. I would love it if he hits 200, but it's just become more rare for pitchers in general to hit 200 innings. But I think that he hits closer to 180, 190 this season. And we see fewer of those maintenance IL stints, right? Like where it's like, oh, he's got a sore elbow or something, bruised kneecap. I don't know. There's all kinds of distinctions you can give to a guy to put him on the IL. He misses 2 or 3 starts and then he comes back. I think we see less of that this year for Hunter Greene, and it's mostly because of what we're hearing from everybody that's at camp. Everybody that's at camp, and here we go, got a best shape of our life alert coming up because everybody's saying Hunter Greene is in the best shape of his life. Last year, he kind of had a little bit of a belly. And I'm not saying, I'm just saying that objectively. I mean, look, I got a little bit of a belly, all right? I got no reason to be talking about that as far as like judgmentally, but it was just observationally, had a little bit of a belly last year. He doesn't have that this year. Dude looks fit. Dude looks strong. He looks like he can go 200 innings if they need him to. And I think that is just going to play into why he's going to take that step forward. But also one of the biggest differences that we saw last year, and it's a thing that's plagued him his entire career, is the long ball. He cut back on that last year. In 2023, his homers per 9 allowed. So it was kind of like the average, like if a guy pitched 9 innings, this is how many home runs he would allow every 9 innings out. He allowed 1.5 homers per 9 in 2023. In 2024, he allowed 0.7. Cut it in half. You'll love to see that. I really think that he is on a Cy Young trajectory, and he's going to be very close to that this year, if not win it. That might be one of my bold predictions, is that he ends up winning it. We'll discuss that more when Steve returns next week, though. I'll tell you that. But with that being said, there are still position battles that are going on in camp right now, and I'm going to tell you who's going to win the three main position battles that are going on coming up next. Everydayers will know that I've been saying to take the over on the Reds win total for this season over on FanDuel. They got it at 79.5. It just feels like a layup for the Reds to hit that. But don't just take my word for it. According to FanDuel, the most bets that any team has received from the general public is for the over on the Reds win total. Everybody believes in the Reds. You should too, just like I do. Go throw a couple of bucks over that on FanDuel. Plus, you can check out the NBA lines, the college basketball lines. We got conference championship season coming along, because your first $5 winning wager is going to net you $150 in bonus bets over on FanDuel. So create your account over at FanDuel.com and get winning today. FanDuel is the official sports book of Locked On. Make sure you are subscribed. You become an everydayer by subscribing. Make sure you're subscribed, because we've got so much content coming for you as spring training rolls along and we get closer to opening day, just 20 days away from opening day, man. Getting so excited. Can't wait. And I hope that you're along with us every single day here on the Locked On Reds podcast. But there are three main position battles in camp, and they're not the biggest. Like, we're not talking about super. I mean, there's a starting rotation spot that's up for grabs, but quite frankly, years past, you really didn't know who was going to be part of the starting rotation. You could make a case for multiple everyday positions that we're trying to figure out. And while we don't necessarily know who the first or third baseman is, there's a couple of guys that it's just gonna be. Like, it's gonna be Jeimer Candelario, CES, and Gavin Lux are gonna kind of be rotating. And then whenever Spencer Steer is healthy, he's going to be rotating around. It's not going to be an everyday player at those corner infield positions, but there's going to be some guys that they're the main guys at those spots. And I think it's probably going to be CES at first base and Gavin Lux, Spencer Steer at third base, something like that. But there are three main spots that are up for grabs right now. The final rotation spot is the key one of these three, and I think it's Andrew Abbott. I think he is healthy, and I believe that he will be ramped up and ready to go by the time that the Reds need a fifth starter. They've always got that off day after opening day. And while I don't think that means that they reset the rotation, there's still a good chance that by the time that game number 5 rolls around, you can still pitch Hunter Greene in game number 5. So if you really need to, you don't need that fifth spot right away. Don't need it out of the gate. So if he needs a few extra days, I think that the Reds can handle that, and he will be their fifth starter. There's a chance, if that's not the case, like on opening day, maybe Andrew Abbott's not on the roster and you have an extra bullpen spot. But that would be the only reason I think he's not announced as part of the opening day 26. He will be the first, whenever the Reds need their 5 starter, he's going to be the guy that gets that call, because he's one of the best 5 pitchers on this team. I think it's funny that there's been such a discussion through camp as to whether or not he should be in the starting 5. And everybody was bringing up Rhett Lauder. Well, Rhett Lauder's not going to be ready by opening day. And I would venture to say the Reds should slow play that as much as they can, because they don't have to have him up right away. And Graham Ashcraft has been stretched out as a starter, but I still think the main plan for him is to be out of the bullpen. He can kind of be, a spot starter when you need him, a long relief pitcher when they need him, things like that. A little bit more on him in just a moment, but I think that Andrew Abbott is the best of the 3 current healthy guys ready to go in camp, because it's Graham Ashcraft and Carson Spires that he's competing against. I think that it's nice to have Carson Spires, but honestly, he should be 7th or 8th, and you could even argue 9th, depending on how ready you think Chase Petty is. It's kind of, it almost rhymes. It doesn't quite rhyme, but it almost rhymes. Ready for Chase Petty. Anyway, but depending on how ready you think Chase Petty is, Carson Spires maybe even is behind him on the depth chart. But it's good to have Carson Spires on the team because you know that, if things do hit the fan, you still got some guys that you can turn to. And you need a guy like Spires. But I think when the Reds need their fifth starter for the first time, they're going to call on Andrew Abbott. And I think that's who wins that spot. I mentioned his name already, but the final bullpen spot for me is Graham Ashcraft's. Because consider this. This is how the bullpen shakes out right now. And I think we'll see Alexis Diaz either in today's game that's coming up very soon, depending on when you're listening to this, it may have already happened, or this weekend at some point. That's what the reports are. Then Alexis Diaz will be ready to go for opening day. So we'll see Diaz, Taylor Rogers, who's looked really good this spring, Sam Maul, Emilio Pagan, Brent Suter, Scott Barlow, Tony Santillan. All those guys I think are locks. I think they're in. That's the bullpen right now. So there's one spot that's left. And I think that Graham Ashcraft is the easy pick. Now, he's stretched out as a starter right now, but that's so he can be insurance if another starter struggles early. Because think about this. Like, we talked about Nick Lodolo on the last podcast. Like, there's a lot of folks that are worried, like, well, Nick Lodolo doesn't look like he's in midseason form. Quite frankly, Hunter Greene, if you really want to bellyache about spring stats, hasn't had that good of a spring. But I think he's going to be fine for opening day. It's just, the spring numbers don't bear that out. But we know, I mean, come on, you know this. If you're a baseball fan, you don't even really have to be a Locked On Reds every day to know this. But if you're a baseball fan, you know that pitchers struggle early in the season, right? They don't have the feel for their out pitch, or maybe they just lose the feel for pitches in general, and they get it back 2 or 3 starts into the season, but their first couple of starts might be a little rocky. That's why you have Graham Ashcraft, because he can come in out of the bullpen and give you 2 or 3 innings and bridge a game where maybe your starter doesn't perform that well, but you don't want to burn your bullpen out early either. Plus, the Reds also have Brent Suter, who they've kept stretched out as a starter because he's going to be a long man. So you've got a lefty who's a long man, and you got a righty in Graham Ashcraft who's a long man. This Reds bullpen can be very, very deep if they include Graham Ashcraft in this. So I would love to see that. Plus, my previous pick, whenever we were talking about this early on, like when spring training games were just beginning, I said Brian Shaw would make it simply because he's a Terry Francona guy. He's a vet. He knows how Terry Francona likes to operate. He has looked awful, really bad this spring. Like when he's on the mound, it just doesn't look good. So I don't think, and that's outside of the fact that his statistics bear that out, but just the looks, the eye test from Brian Shaw, just I don't think he's all there. I think that he's kind of been more of a Terry Francona liaison in the bullpen and the locker room during spring training than he has been a guy that's going to make this team. So I think Graham Ashcraft fills out that last spot in the Reds bullpen. And then lastly, the final bench spot, and the reason that this is even open is because I believe Spencer Steer will begin the season on the IL. I haven't really heard any health updates since it was said that he got a cortisone shot, because he's basically taken this week off to let the cortisone shot do its thing, let his shoulder heal a bit. And I think they're going to see where he's at. But I think they're going to slow play that even more. And I don't think he's going to be ready for opening day. So with that being said, there's one spot that opens up on the bench, because you've got your 2 catchers and Tyler Stevenson and Jose Trevino. You got your infielders. Still getting over this cold here, guys. I'm almost done. But your infielders of CES and Jamer Candelario, Matt McClain, Gavin Lux, Ellie De La Cruz, and Santiago Espinal. And then you've got your outfielders of Austin Hayes, TJ Friedel, Jake Fraley, and Stuart Fairchild. So that means that there's one spot open. And with Spencer Steer going out, there's an argument to be made that it could be Cooper Bowman, because Cooper Bowman can play both the outfield and the infield. But I think that his bat just isn't ready. Cooper Bowman has not played a major league game yet, like in the regular season. He was a Rule 5 pick from the Giants, I think I'm messing that up. I think it's the Mariners. Anyway, he was a Rule 5 pick because he was stuck in the minor leagues. And so he gets the shot to make the roster, but I don't think that he hits well enough to do that. So I think that the final bench spot goes to Blake Dunn. Gavin Lux can kind of fill in as the super utility guy for Spencer Steer. He can play infield and outfield, but if you bring Blake Dunn in, he's another right-hander, and he can be the outfielder to kind of make you feel good about, if you need to give TJ Friedel a day off, you can put Blake Dunn in center field, or you can put Stuart Fairchild in center field and put Blake Dunn in right field, whatever that is, that can work out because Blake Dunn can play all three spots defensively, and he's okay at the plate. I still don't think we know who he is on the major league side of things because he just hasn't gotten that much of an opportunity, but I believe that he profiles well as a nice bench outfielder for the team. So I think that Blake Dunn will take that open bench spot with Spencer Steer beginning the season on the IL. So yeah, the three main position battles, I think Andrew Abbott is your fifth starter, Graham Ashcraft is your final bullpen spot, and Blake Dunn is your final bench spot. But hey, we've got 20 days left until opening day, which means I get to tell you why Frank Robinson was robbed of being the best Reds player that there ever was. That's coming up next. If you can't catch us on YouTube, you can listen to us on your favorite podcasting app. We're seriously on all of them out there. Go check us out today. All right, guys, 20 days left, guys and gals, 20 days left until opening day. I cannot wait. Section 131. It's going to be awesome. Going to be down at the banks all day. It's going to be such a fun day. And fingers crossed that the weather's nice. We've been seeing all kinds of weather. It's going to be 60 one day, 40 the next, snow one day, sun the next. Good old Cincinnati weather, right? But hey, we're ready for opening day. And with 20 days left, we've done the countdown. I kind of gave a few days a break because there was a lot of stuff I wanted to talk about there for the last couple of days. But we talk about, who was the best player to wear number 20. It's obviously Frank Robinson. His number was retired. But quite frankly, I don't think Frank Robinson gets the credit for being as good as he was because of the worst trade in Major League Baseball history. The Reds trade him because he's an old 30. He's not going to be that good the rest of his career. Something about Cincinnati sports teams and players that hit their 30s, by the way. Go check out Locked On Bengals for more on that. But anyway, I'll let them cover that. But Frank Robinson played 10 seasons with the Reds. And in 10 seasons with the Reds, he had a WAR of 63.7. Consider the fact that is fifth all time on the franchise list. Only 4 players had more WAR during their Reds tenure. Pete Rose, Johnny Bench, Barry Larkin, and Joey Votto. All legends, all guys who were here much longer than Frank Robinson was. Joey Votto and Johnny Bench both played 17 seasons as a Red. Pete Rose and Barry Larkin played 19 seasons as a Red. And they were all just a little bit higher than Frank Robinson. Like in 19 years as a Red, Pete Rose had 78 WAR, which is amazing, and in the highest number in the franchise's history. So if you would have given 9 more years to Frank Robinson, what would he have done? Well, in 6 years in Baltimore, he got 32 more WAR, just in 6 years. So if you would have added 32 WAR to his 63 WAR, he would have been far and away the number 1 Reds player of all time in wins above replacement. He would have been almost 20 WAR ahead of Pete Rose. That's how good he was. And I think that, there's some folks that are probably saying, well, WAR, what else is it? His career batting average as a Red was 303. His career OPS as a Red was 943. Like, in 10 seasons, he was putting up those kind of numbers. Frank Robinson would have been far and away the best Red ever to play had the Reds not made the worst trade in MLB history. I firmly believe that. And I would wonder at your argument to that, because I think that he did everything elitely, right? Elitely. Is that a word? He was elite at everything. Let's put it that way. Hitting, running, fielding, throwing, everything. Frank Robinson was the best at it. And then they trade him to Baltimore, and he wins the Triple Crown because he's an old 30. I think that we forget because he wasn't here as long as some of the other guys. And I mean, you could even make the argument for Joe Morgan. If Joe Morgan had been a Red, for the same amount of time as Joey Votto or Johnny Bench or Pete Rose or Barry Larkin, where would Joe Morgan be on this list? Because Joe Morgan's right behind Frank Robinson, and Joe Morgan was a Red even less time than Frank Robinson was. But there's some dudes that their tenure in Cincinnati was cut short for various reasons because of where they were in their careers and things like that, and bad decisions by the front office. But I feel like it's a layup that Frank Robinson would have been the absolute best Red ever. Like overall, ever. Would have been the best Red that we've ever seen. And I think it's silly that he got traded. Of course, because he was traded so unceremoniously early, he was not the last player to ever wear number 20. There were 9 other players after him to wear the number 20 before his number finally got retired by the Reds. And it's interesting that my grandpa's favorite player ever wore number 20 as well, Cesar Geronimo. So I got to mention him for grandpa. But does anybody know? And I'll give you a couple of seconds to answer this and I'll give you the answer. But who knows the last Red to wear number 20? He only did it for 1 year. So this is probably going to, yeah. Anyway. Okay. The answer is Chris Steins. Chris Steins in 1997. Last player for the Reds to ever wear number 20. But obviously the best number 20 is Frank Robinson. Not even close. A couple of interesting notes on that. Like Ted Kluszewski actually wore the number 20 for 1 season back in 1947. Like I mentioned, Cesar Geronimo as well. Jeff Branson wore it there in the middle of the 90s, 92 through 97, and then Chris Steins wore it for the final time in 1997. It's so funny to see, like, the career that Frank Robinson had. It just feels as though he's somehow underrated for how good he was. I think that a lot of us talk about Frank Robinson like he's the best Red ever and immediately get shot down. But when you realize what his career was, and had the Reds not made the worst trade of all time, easy money would have been the best Red to ever have done it. And before we get out of here, shout out, we also have our opening day parade. Grand Marshal Chris Sabo announced as the Grand Marshal of the opening day parade. We'll talk a little bit more about Chris Sabo's career here in a couple of days whenever we get to, the number 17. But great to see that Spud's going to be the Grand Marshal of the opening day parade. 20 days away from that parade, from that game, from the best day in the city of Cincinnati every single year. Cannot wait for opening day. Going to start a season that is absolutely phenomenal. I am sure that this season is going to be phenomenal. Make sure that you follow us every single day all throughout the season, because Locked On Reds will be with you every single day, bringing you new and exciting content about your Cincinnati Reds. Steve will be back with me here next week. He's been traveling around just like I was traveling around the week before. We're all going to be on the same page, and the show will be whole coming up next week. So make sure you join us as we get you set. I'm sure he's going to probably totally agree with me on my position picks, the position battles. So get ready for that as he comes back next week, because you can trust that every single day we will be Locked On Reds every single day.